Hey guys, welcome back to my channel for another battle report. This time it's gonna be Dread Elves against Dread Elves. We just smacked down some armies to have a friendly match. And Dread Elves against Dread Elves, it's always gonna be a lot of killing and not a lot of models left at the end on the board. I opted to go for a very high MSU build with a lot of wounds in total, for Dread Elves at least. So I just have small units of a lot of different infantry. I have some bigger units of Dread Legionnaires, even though they're not that big units in the end, um, compared to what other armies can field. I have some Dread Knights, some Chariots, and some Dread Reapers. My opponent had a bit of a more elite list, even. So he spends quite a lot of points on his Oracle and Cult Priest. He has a Captain on a Pegasus. He has 2 core units of Corsairs that basically make up most of his core, with a lot of upgrades. So these are actually quite pricey units for the amount of wounds that they have, or a lot of points for the amount of wounds that they have. Then he has 2 units of Dark Raiders, a unit of Dancers of Yama and Special, and 2 Hydras. So in total, his list doesn't feature a lot of units, and we discussed it also before the game how this matchup would fare. And basically, our conclusion was that if the bolt throwers were able to whittle down the Hydras together with my chariots in the first turns of the game, then it would be a really tough uphill battle for him. And if his regeneration saves, especially on his Hydras, um, would turn out to be great, then especially at the start of the game, then the game would probably be his. Because, well, he does have a couple of threats that my bolt throwers would really like to sink some darts in. So he has the Cult Priest, he has the Pegasus Captain, both Hydras, and obviously also the Dancers of Yama. I mean, in my list, I only have the bolt throwers basically as shooting outputs. So removing the Dancers of Yama with my shooting is going to be quite interesting. My opponent also sent me a video of his army. So this video shows his entire collection of Dread Elves. Just like me, he has been playing Dread Elves, or formerly Dark Elves, for a very long time now. I still remember playing against him occasionally at tournaments like 10 years ago or so. So he has been working on his army for a long time already. It's a impressive collection, just like mine is. I think we are both the players with the most Red Elves, probably in the Netherlands, or at least most Red Elves that have been painted to quite a nice standard. So his army features also a lot of nice free hands. It features these incredible models for Hydras, and basically every single choice that you would ever want to field with Red Elves. He also has a ton of conversions in the army. So if you're really well known with the range of models that exists within Dread Elves, or within the Citadel catalog, then you must have already recognized some of these conversions. Yeah, it's in the end a really impressive army to look at. Um, and the color scheme is also just really impressive. I think it's quite impressive to see how he managed to make the units each look really unique, but then still have a bit of a coherent feel to the army. I think that's something that some people sometimes struggle with, but in this army it's really properly done. So something that comes back on every single unit is the heavy accents of just some white stripes also somewhere. Well, obviously the red and the black, but the black doesn't really feature that much that the army becomes too dark and you can't really see what's going on anymore. So I think it's a beautifully painted army. I always love to see a lot of conversions in armies, just because it also shows the creativity of the player. So yeah, I think he doesn't really have anything that he would still want to add to this army, because he can field nearly everything. With that, we will go into the game. There will be some more army pictures at the end of the video though. So we played in Circle and King of the Hill. My opponent was able to choose the table side, so he chose the flanks, to deploy on. So I got the middle, and for King of the Hill, he chose the hill in the middle for me to go on. I chose the ruins on the left side on the board for him as an objective. So in his army, he only has 3 scoring units, 2 units of Corsairs and 1 unit of Dancers of Yemas. So objective-wise, if I'm going to be able to whittle down his troops a little bit, it's probably going to go in my favor. Yeah, and going into this game, I was quite confident about my odds, just especially if the bolt throwers are able to perform a little bit. I had Witchcraft as a lore in this game, and I think that the list that I played doesn't feature sufficient range damage output to warrant Witchcraft. And Witchcraft really helps if you have an army with some big combat blocks also, because then the spell to give yourself random movement also becomes suddenly really scary for your opponent, because then you can just give random movement to this big combat block and threaten everywhere on the board, basically. Yeah, I let my opponent do a little bit of deploys. I do a couple of deploys myself. At the end, I decide to deploy most of my army, but I don't finish deploying because I still want to know where his last Hydra goes. So in 9th Age, you are able to deploy as many units as you like. That means that you don't have to deploy all of your units also. So what usually happens is that someone drops and then drops everything. In this case, I really wanted to know where I would want my last unit of executioners to deal with a Hydra. So the only thing you can't see off screen is on the top left a unit of Dread Knights, together with my BSB, and otherwise you can see nearly everything deployed on the field. I also do have still my 2 bolt throwers off the top of the screen. So as you can see, this is the deployment that we went for. My opponent does load his Hydras on one flank, and his dancers on the other. The Corsairs stay in the middle to guard the objective, and I don't know, maybe to at some point try to get to the ruins. But going from what's present on the board, I would say that this is going to be quite a good game for my side. Due to the fact that I only had 2 choices left still to deploy after my opponent's last drop, my opponent only gets a +2 on the dice roll. He still wants to go first, he still vanguards up a little bit, but as he is not certain of going first, he cannot vanguard up as far as he probably would want to, and that's the reason why I dropped a lot of my units. So this is a bit of a tool to make sure that your opponent does not get full advantage of his vanguard move. So what he does first turn is to move up really aggressively with his Dark Raiders, and he positions the Pegasus in such a way that I would need an 11 on overrun. The Hydra is a bit closer, so I only need an 8. He is moving up quite aggressively because of the bolt throwers on my side. He kind of has to close the distance because otherwise I'm just going to gun him down over time. And I think this is also where getting a lore like Occultism, even Divination, just any other lore with a bit more ranged output would have really helped me. I'm not that used to playing with bolt throwers with Dread Elves, just because the 180 points for the 6 shots a turn is, in my view, just too expensive for what they do now. You can also obviously opt for the single shot. Then you have a bolt thrower that normally hits on 3+, 4+ long range. But I don't really like this option either, because for armies like orcs and goblins for Kingdom of Aquitaine, you can get bolt throwers that do the same or even better, because they have clipped wings or D3+1 wounds. These elven bolt throwers, or at least the dark elf ones, they only inflict D3 wounds without clipped wings, and you're paying like twice the amount of points to get a +1 to hit on them, compared to goblin bolt throwers. And of course, it's a totally different army, so a lot of people will say that you can't really compare the armies and stuff. but just paying 180 points for a single shot that's likely gonna hit only on a 4+ is expensive to say the least. I mean, in order for these bolt throwers to make back their 540 points combined, they have to do a lot of damage. I'm not saying that they are really, really bad, but I'm just saying that they don't really conform to my playstyle generally. So I'm not used to playing with them. I'm not used to picking a lore that supports them well. So maybe I should do that more often. Anyway, this is how my opponent advances. So the Corsairs in the middle, they vanguarded up in the end a little bit. The Hydras, they move up aggressively. And on the left flank, he has his Dancers of Yema that try to close the distance as quickly as they can. So he has the Banner of Speed on there, and he has Cult of Yema because they're Dancers of Yema, so they get +1 movement from that. So in the end, they have movement 7, or at last an advance of 7 and a march of 14. With the buff of the Cauldron, they could go to a maximized charge. So they would have a 7 advance with Swift Stride, basically. So they do threaten quite a far distance, to be honest. Then again, on my left flank, I have a unit of Dread Knights still off camera. I have my unit of Corsairs. I have 2 units of Dread Legionnaires. I have a unit of Blades of Nap. So together, I would be quite confident that these guys can take this single block of Dancers of Yema on. So then it's my turn. I declare charge with my Dread Knights onto his Dark Raiders. Mostly basically to inflict a panic check on the Dancers of Yema block, because if that goes wrong, there is a small chance that it goes wrong. If it goes wrong, then I'm going to be really happy, because basically his entire flank collapsed then, and then that's just going to be the game. Because then he cannot really push with his Corsairs in the center. He can still push with his Hydras, but my shooting can just be focused on the Hydras, and I don't have to worry about my flank. And if he wants to declare some charges, I can just push up some units, flee with them, and just leave them out in the open, ready for a counter charge. My chariots, one of the chariots declares a charge on the Corsairs that have to flee. My opponent judges. The other chariot charges a Hydra in the hope that I will inflict some wounds on them. I make the mistake of also declaring a charge with my Tower Guard on the same Hydra. I should have just let the chariot do its work, because it was a long charge anyway for the Tower Guard. So my opponent is now in this case able to do a stand and shoot with the breath weapon on the Tower Guard, inflicting 6 wounds on the unit. Basically neutering the unit quite useless at this point. And on top of that, it was a long distance charge, so I probably shouldn't have made the charge at all. Yeah, on the right flank, we charge in on the Dark Raiders there. My opponent has to stick, because otherwise I can redirect into his Hydra, into his Captain on Pegasus. So I have unit of Dark Acolyte lined up to overrun into the Hydra, because with a 7 or an 8 on overrun, they are likely going to make it. So this is quite an ideal situation, because right now I can still shoot at the Hydra with my bolt throwers, and then later overrun into the Hydra. And yeah, Dark Acolytes are quite a good choice to go for monster hunting, because they are immune to stomps. They have a 4 up Aegis save, which makes them quite ideal for monster hunting. The only downside is that a Hydra still has breath weapon, and 2d6 strength 4 hits on a unit of 5 acolytes is, yeah, it hurts. But on the other hand, I'm gonna have 8 attacks that hit him on 3+ with poison, that wound him on 5+. So it's mostly gonna be the armor that I will struggle with. But anyway, I was calculating to just need a couple of units in order to get through this Hydra on the right flank. Yeah, and then the chariot versus Hydra, it's also just a means for me to get just a couple of wounds in, just to try and snip off some wounds of the Hydra over time. Yeah, so this is the board state. On the right flank, I'm quite happy about what is happening. On the left flank, yeah, the same basically. I have a unit of Dread Legionnaires ready to receive a charge from the Dancers of Yema. I am going to flee with that unit, which puts me behind my Blaze of Nap. Blaze of Nap are fearless, so that's going to be just fine. On the left, I have my unit of Dread Knights with my BSB. In the previous turn, my opponent was quite lucky with being able to just whittle down this unit with his magic to just one Dread Knight remaining, and my BSB, who took a wound actually. He took a wound from some shooting from a Dark Raider. So this was a bit of an unlucky turn with respect to that for me. I have the unit of Corsairs that just crept up to go behind the ruins. So my opponent can charge into my Dread Legionnaires. I am going to flee then. He'll most likely have a failed charge. He can redirect into the Blades of Nap or into the Cold Knight, or the Cold War Knight with the BSB. But I don't expect him to go through really, because he is in a horde formation, so he doesn't count his rank. He just has a banner and a charge. My BSB has a banner itself, so it's going to be a -1 for me to start off. And then I have Hero's Heart with paired weapons, so I have 5 attacks at strength 5. I still have the Dread Knight, so together I'm expecting to do something like 2 or 3 wins. My opponent can probably kill the Knight, maybe do a wound on my BSB, but he's going to be restricted in what he's going to do, because if he's going to go for great weapons, he has about 9 attacks on my unit. He has 4 up to hit then. He has 2 up to wound, and I have a 4 up save, which becomes a 3 up for the BSB because he doesn't have magical attack. So in that case, I am most likely gonna stick around at least, if not win the combat, and then I can get a counter charge with the Corsairs onto his flank. As you can see here, I did get an overrun of the Dark Acolytes into the Hydra, and also luckily with the Dread Knights into his captain on Pegasus. So this is the reason why I don't like the Midnight Cloak. You really can't put your Pegasus captain anymore anywhere where he's in danger of getting charged, because you're really reliant on the charge. We also discussed this a little bit, and yeah, my preference for this for the captain on Pegasus build is still going to be Death Cheater with a great weapon, just to get some reliable damage output. Preferably put a BSB on him so that he can stick around more easily, and turn him more into a grindy piece than a piece that is really scary on the charge. Because in the end, if you only have a captain, you have 3 attacks, you're going to likely miss one on the charge because bad dice happen. Your target's likely going to have either an Aegis save or a regen save. And then if you miss one of your wound rolls, which the chance is not that high, but if you do, you're only going to end up with 1 wound that goes through, that turns into D3 wounds. So 95 points to get that is not that good. A 3 Aegis save against range damage is really good, but if you get charged, you're still just screwed basically. So I'd rather just have a 4 up regen all around on this model. On the left flank, in my opponent's turn, he charges into my Dread Knights, and it proceeds in the way as described earlier. So the Dread Legionnaires, they flee. My opponent makes a redirect into the Dread Knights. Unfortunately for me, he does make the charge, so I didn't really want him to, because I'd rather just have him not make the charge and keep the initiative. But this is also fine. On the right flank, nothing else happens really. I also, in my turn, I cast some magic. I cast Raven's Wing on my Dread Legionnaires in order to be able to charge his fleeing Corsairs if they were still going to be fleeing the next turn, which they are. Unfortunately, however, the chariot that charged into the Corsairs on the left had to go through the forest. It suffered 2 wounds from dangerous terrain, so I had 2 ones on my rolls. And then my opponent proceeded to just kill off my chariot with, let's see, 12 attacks. This was highly unlikely. I mean, I expected to maybe get like 2 wounds if things went bad. In the end, I got 4 wounds on my chariot, opening up my Dread Legionnaire's flank for my charge of my opponent's Corsairs. So this was really some unlucky situation for me. And then that proceeded to happen with the Hydra on the right. So I believe the Dark Acolytes, they managed to inflict 1 wound on the Hydra, and then the Hydra just completely obliterated my Dark Acolytes because of a failed fear check, I believe. So I only hit him on 4+, he was gonna hit me on 2+. Yeah, that was not really good. Yeah. So then my opponent sets up his Hydra in order to get a charge onto my Dread Knights. And my Dread Knights should be able to swiftly take care of my opponent's Captain on Pegasus. And then ideally I can just reform, face the Hydra, and just get rid of the Hydra. We do the other combats, and yeah, on the top left, I believe not a lot happens. Like, my opponent, he goes for the great weapons, he doesn't manage to do a single wound. I do manage to do 1 wound, 2 wounds, something like that. And my opponent is steadfast, unfortunately. He goes to a little bit less wide formation so that he gets his rank bonus, because likely the ranks are gonna matter more than the wounds that he does. And then basically we go into my turn. I'm a little bit disappointed by how many wounds I'm able to do on the Hydras, because the Chariots, even with the D6+1 impact, I got 6 impact hits or 7 impact hits. Including the crew and everything, I only managed to do 1 wound on the Hydra, I believe. So that was a bit of a downer. And otherwise, yeah, my Dread Legionnaires, they luckily stick with the Corsairs in the flank. And at this point, I'm still feeling quite confident about the game, even though there's some issues that I encounter. So on the right flank, my Dread Knights did not manage to kill off the Captain on Pegasus because of my 2 hit rolls, 5 2-hit rolls. I missed like 2 of them. I missed the 2 wound roll with a rerollable 2+2 wound. And my opponent saved 1 wound, I believe. So he only got 1 wound in the end. Yeah, that was suboptimal. Because if I had managed to just go through, then I would have been able to pivot, charge into the Hydra, give him a bad day because he doesn't have a breath deck anymore. And I would have been able to clean up the field more effectively. I do luckily get my Corsair charge onto the flank of my opponent's Dancers of Yama. And otherwise, my Blades of Napa to undergo the previous turn a what's it called? Grave Calls. So my opponent was able to remove 6 or 7 of them. And all this while, I've been still shooting with the Dread Reapers. The one in the field that you see still on camera, the previous turn I cast the Witchcraft random move on it because I was afraid that the Hydras would catch it, so I could just move away 3d6 of my opponent. Resulting is that I can't really shoot with it because it has moved, and it is an artillery weapon, so I believe it can't move and shoot. So that is a bit unfortunate, but it's a sacrifice that I was willing to make. And yeah, in terms of how the board feels at this point, it still feels pretty good. So I have flank charged my opponent's Dancers of Yama. So he's not going to be steadfast likely, but because I will be able to inflict some wounds. Unfortunately, I just missed 1 wound in order to remove his steadfast, and in addition, he just kills the Dread Knight. He kills my BSB. Because of 2 unlucky saves on 3+. So I had a 3+ save, he inflicts 2 wounds, I had 2 wounds remaining. I roll a 1 and a 2, I believe. So that was really unlucky. Also because it gives my opponent now the option of reforming later in the game. The combat against Corsairs, I am able to grind down my opponent's Corsairs just through the sheer amount of bodies I have over him. Unfortunately, however, my opponent's Hydra manages to clean up my Chariot this round, whilst he only suffered 1 wound up till now, despite all of the damage output I tried to deliver on it. I do this round manage to kill the captain of my opponent, but this is in my view, just one turn too late, because now I'm open to a Hydra charge. The Dread Knights might still fare well against a full health, nearly full health Hydra. They might still just be able to do a couple of wounds. If my opponent goes in, he's gonna have an Executioner charge into the flank, and these guys, they should be able to mop up this Hydra, because I'm gonna have Hatreds, I'm gonna have Strength 6, I'm gonna have Lethal Strike, so for every 6 that I roll to wound, my opponent is definitely gonna get a wound without any regen save. And it's gonna be 13 attacks if I end up in his flank. So with rerolls to hit, normally on 4+ to hit, that should be like 9 hits, and that should be 1 to 2 lethal strikes and another another 5 or 6 wounds. Another 5 wounds, I think. So after regen saves, that should be at least 3 wounds to the Hydra, and I believe the Hydra has left on 2 or 3 wounds. So that should be fine. I should be able to grind it down with my unit of Dread Judges. My opponent's Divine Altar charges into my Blaze of Nap. Up to now, the Divine Altar has taken 3 or 2 wounds. Yeah, I believe I once multi-shot at it. I did a wound. I once did a single shot on it and I inflicted 2 wounds, so I was quite lucky with that. But otherwise, the shooting has been highly ineffective in this game, to be honest. So the bolt throwers, they did get quite a lot of opportunities to fire, but they just didn't pull their weight at all. Yeah, and the Hydras, they are unfortunately for me just surviving quite well. So the Hydra in the middle is now facing off against my Tower Guard. This is a bit of an unfortunate charge, and I probably shouldn't have given my opponent the opportunity to do so. The Hydra on the right, he does a wound or 2 on my Cultural Knights. And my Cultural Knights, they decide to flee, and the Hydra pursues. I'm luckily still just barely on the board, so I might still be able to rally. Yeah, and then on the top left, the combat against the Dancers of Yema is not really going to go into my advantage. I mean, I can opt. Well, I do have my paired weapons and I have a 4-up armor save. My opponent can go for paired weapons as well. He has a 4-up Aegis save and he still has his armor save of a 6+. So it seems kind of fair, but my opponent has offensive skill 5. I have offensive skill 4. With paired weapons, that both goes up. So we both hit each other just on 2+. Wait. He has defensive skill 5, obviously, also, so I only hit him on 3+. I do have Killer Instinct, he doesn't, so that is a bit more of an advantage for me, but he can still choose the weapon that he's going to use. And in addition, he has a rank and a banner, and I don't. I just have his flank. It seems a bit like an even combat, but once we roll the dice, it seems like it wasn't really an even combat. I only managed to kill one of my opponent's Dancers of Yema. My opponent manages to kill 2 of my Corsairs. I make the break test, but my opponent is able to turn. And for the next round, we can all guess what's going to happen there. Yeah, then the Divine Altar, he went into my Blades of Nap. I issued a challenge with my champion to just lock him in place for a round, since I'm steadfast. And then next round, maybe I can just pluck up another wound of my opponent's Divine Altar. We do get the counter charge with the Dread Judges onto the side of the Hydra. And I still have my last unit of Dark Acolytes that can pop up. So I do still have my full magic. So I cast once again Eyes on Fire on a Hydra. I don't do any wounds at all. Yeah. We could say that the dice at this point were a bit against me. I tried to do so much to these Hydras and they just didn't die. So if you also just count up the amount of stuff that my opponent has lost, Yeah, it's a bit disappointing. I mean, I did get one unit of Corsairs of his, and I did get a unit of Dark Raiders, but he still has one unit of Dark Raiders just effectively in play. He still has the rest of its units just in terms of points fully intact. So this is not looking good for me by now, because by now I have lost a lot of points. Yeah, so the shooting continues to be quite ineffective. Um, Even though I am able to just keep my bolt throwers alive for like 4 to 5 turns. So that is going quite well. It's just that they're not doing anything. So maybe it's also because I have left them in the cabinet for a long time and they're a little bit displeased with me not taking them out. Um, but my opponent is also playing quite a good game with the tools that he has. It's at this point that I finally managed to kill the first Hydra, and my expectation is that the second Hydra is just gonna go down now as well. I believe this is my third turn, so the unit of Dread Knights on the right will still be able to, or could still just end up on the hill that's the objective, especially with my Witchcraft magic. Um, and I can also just speed up the Dread Judges. So objective-wise, I still have my unit of Dread Legionnaires that's alive next to the impossible terrain. I still have my Dread Knights on the right, still have the Dread Judges on the right. So they could all still get in range for the hill in the ideal scenario. But we'll see about that. Yeah, otherwise my left flank is now completely collapsing with my opponent's Dancers of Yema. Just annihilating my Corsairs. And the Divine Altar is just chipping down on the Blades of Nab. He did get a wound, I believe, because in the end I still inflict, or I still make 20 attacks with poison, with lightning reflexes, and it is with 6 to wound, so he still has a 2 of armor and a 4 of Aegis, so that is quite tough to go through. But I did like 6 wounds or so, and it's like it's gonna be 1 wound after armor saves, and then it's a 50-50 of whether you do a wound or not. My opponent's 2 Dark Riders stay charging on my Bolt Thrower, and later they're gonna manage to remove it. The Corsairs of my opponent move up to shoot at my Dread Legionnaires, and my opponent in the magic phase manages to remove the last Bolt Thrower from the game. So in the end, Bolt Throwers, if I remember correctly, they did 3 wounds on the Divine Altar, and that's about it. They might have removed like 2 or 3 Dancers of Yema, but I'm really not a fan of Bolt Throwers. And then this matchup basically is just the ideal matchup for Bolt Throwers, because the amount of wounds on my opponent's side is relatively low. The wounds are all just high value wounds that are quite expensive. If you're gonna shoot like at targets like goblins or something with bolt throwers, it's just totally not worth it. Just the damage output of bolt throwers is just way too low for them to be competitive in my view. So I can imagine in ETC armies that you take them just to turn Dread Elves into a little bit more of a draw list. So you kind of make this ranged combat hybrid where you can still perform quite well in combat, but just have these bolt throws as a tiebreaker, or against stuff like a Vermin Swarm with a Vermin Demon, where you can just put them in the back and keep your opponent's Vermin Demon honest. But in single player or in singles tournaments, to me it doesn't make sense to bring bolt throwers. Also because knights are not that popular in general in the meta right now. And the only advantage that the bolt throwers have is just AP6 on the single shot. But then you might as well just play another army. Yeah, so, yeah, by now you might have seen on screen that my Dread judges didn't really manage to perform against the Hydra. So they failed their fear test when they charged in, needing 5s to hit, and after rerolls, I got like 3 or 4 hits. I didn't get any lethal strikes on my 2 wound rolls, and I only got 1 wound through, I believe. So that was horrible. That was just downright horrible. My opponent with the Hydra, he managed to whittle me down to 7 guys, so he did 5 wounds. I had a charge in the flank. It was a big flank because I had a rank. So I lost with -2, I think, and then fear. I did manage to stick, so that apparently was a lucky roll. Yeah, that Hydra should have been definitely dead. And then in his turn, he manages to just annihilate the rest of my Dread judges. Me, again, just failing the fear test, needing 5s to hit, not inflicting any wounds at all. I believe the Hydra on the right is just down on 1 wound now, but he managed to just completely annihilate my Dread judges, which meant that my Dread Knights had to take a panic test. They failed it and they fled the board. Yeah, looking back at this game, it feels like the dice were a little bit against me. I mean, there were a couple of occasions, a lot of occasions where that could have been better for me. But yeah, I could also have played better. I mean, at the start of the game, I very enthusiastically rammed my chariots into my opponent's lines. I think the charge into the woods on the Corsairs was a good charge to make, but I think that the charge on the Hydra was probably not a good charge to make, at least not in combination with the charge of the Tower Guard onto the Hydra, because my opponent, you have to draw out the breath weapons of these Hydras if you're playing with Dread Elves, because the breath weapons can really be devastating to certain units, like Tower Guard. So if I had just charged in the Raptor Chariot onto the Hydra, likely my opponent would have used the breath weapon against the Raptor Chariot, and then it would have been nice to just draw out this breath weapon and be left with a Hydra that doesn't have a breath weapon anymore. It could have been so that my opponent would have broken the chariot in the first round. No, it's not that likely. I mean, he has 7 attacks that hit me on 4+, wound me on 4+ against the chariot. So it's going to be like 2 wounds max. I still have a 5 of armor slave left, and then the breath weapon comes over. He's going to inflict like 2 wounds onto my chariot, and on the charge, I am gonna do 2 hits with the crew. I am gonna do probably 2 wounds because I have a reroll of the 1 to wound. So I'll save 1 of those, and then Bactits might do another wound. So yeah, that's quite even. I'm not gonna break on that, even if he uses the breath weapon. So I think I should definitely not have charged in with the Tower Guard on that first charge. Otherwise, just army list wise, I think Witchcraft is not a lot to go to if you're fielding quite some bolt throwers, because you just want to amplify the shooting that you have a little bit, so you can do some decent damage somewhere. Just being able to do D6 strength 4 even somewhere would be highly interesting. So either going for alchemy with some damage output, or divination, or occultism. That would be way better if you're fielding anyway 3 bolt throwers. Yeah, otherwise I'm quite happy again with the Dark Acolytes. The Dark Acolytes are still an amazing unit for the points. You pay for them. Dread Knights are nice. Dread Legionnaires are just a good unit as they go to Agility 7 when they get charged. Yeah, and Hydras are totally badass. I mean, even the models that my opponent is using, they are really badass models. So they deserve to be badass, right? In the end, we finished the game with a 17-3 for my opponent. Because after points it's a 14-6, and then the scenario also goes to my opponent. Because he killed just all of my scoring. So as promised, here are a couple of more pictures of my opponent's Dread Elf collection. It was a really cool game. It was a really nice game to play. And it was definitely a lot of slaughter on both sides. Mostly on mine, though. The amount of wins I lost will not easily be forgotten. Thank you for watching, and see you the next time.